On a bright Sunday morning in May 1957, in the quiet market town of Hexham in the north of England, two sisters set off for church. Joanna was 11, creative, generous, prone to dressing up and performing plays she'd written herself. Jacqueline, 6, was her shadow, content to follow wherever her older sister led. They were joined by a friend, and the three children walked ahead of their parents, John and Florence Pollock, who watched them go with no sense that anything was wrong. Across town, a woman named Marjorie Wynne was in the grip of a crisis no one around her fully understood. Struggling with depression, she had taken what she believed was a fatal dose of aspirin and phenobarbital, climbed into her car, and begun driving, not toward anywhere, but toward an end. Witnesses later described her car weaving erratically through the streets, bearing down on pedestrians. When it reached Joanna and Jacqueline, the girls had nowhere to go. A wall ran alongside the pavement, blocking any escape. The car struck them directly, and all three children perished that day. It was the kind of tragedy that stops a small town cold. The accident made headlines across Britain, and Marjorie Wynne was later tried at Northumberland Assizes, a regional court for the most serious cases in the country. The court ultimately found her unfit for a standard prison sentence and committed her indefinitely to a psychiatric facility. For John and Florence Pollock, it was the beginning of a story that would follow their family for the rest of their lives, though not in any way grief counsellors or clergy could have prepared them for. John Pollock had been raised in the Church of England before converting to Catholicism later on in life, and by any outward measure, he was a conventional, hard-working man, running a grocery and milk delivery business with his wife. But privately, John had carried an unusual belief since childhood. He was convinced that reincarnation was real. He'd first encountered the idea in a novel at the age of 9, and the idea had never left him. For years, he later told interviewers, he would pray at night for some kind of proof that would vindicate what he believed in, and, in his words, prove the priests wrong. After all, reincarnation is not a phenomena that Christians believe in. On the day of the accident, John experienced what he described as a vision of the girls in heaven. In the weeks that followed, he became convinced their spirits lingered in an upstairs room of the family home, and he took upon spending time there simply to feel close to them. He came to believe their deaths had been some kind of punishment for having prayed all those years for evidence of something he wasn't supposed to believe in. And yet, he also believed the prayer itself was about to be answered. He became certain his daughters would be born again into his own family. Florence did not share this conviction. She was newly grieving 2 children, and now faced with a husband who spoke openly about their daughters returning from the dead. She was a devout Catholic and considered the idea of reincarnation as blasphemous. The disagreement was serious enough that it strained the marriage to its limits, but in the end, they made it through to the other side. A few months went by, and then one day, Florence discovered she was pregnant again. John's reaction to the pregnancy alarmed his wife further. He became fixated on the idea that Florence was carrying twins, specifically, that she was carrying Joanna and Jacqueline, returning together as they had lived together. Florence's doctor examined her repeatedly and found no evidence to support this, much to her husband's disappointment. Based on physical palpation and a single detectable fetal heartbeat, the doctor said there was only one baby. There was no history of twins in either of the families, and by every medical indication available in 1958, this was going to be a single, ordinary birth. And yet, on the 4th of October 1958, a year and a half after the accident, Florence gave birth to identical twin girls, naming them Gillian and Jennifer. It was only after the birth that something else emerged. Jennifer had a birthmark on her forehead in exactly the spot where Jacqueline, her deceased elder sister, had once gashed her head falling onto a bucket as a toddler, an injury that had left a permanent, faintly depressed scar. Jennifer also had a second birthmark on her left waist, in precisely the location of a birthmark Jacqueline had carried her entire short life, and despite being identical twins, Gillian had neither of these marks. Because Gillian and Jennifer were monozygotic twins, a fact later confirmed by blood testing, they were, genetically, the same person twice over. Whatever accounted for Jennifer's marks, it wasn't hereditary. Identical genes should have produced identical skin. When the twins were about 3 years old, their parents brought down a box from the attic. Toys that had previously belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline, packed away since the accident took them away. Without prompting, Gillian reached for the doll that had been Joanna's. Jennifer reached for the one that had been Jacqueline's. Both girls described the dolls as gifts from Santa Claus, which had been true, but was something neither child had been told. When Gillian spotted a small toy ringer that had once belonged to Joanna, she picked it up and said, "This is my toy ringer," adding that Santa had brought it to her too. Neither girl argued over any of the toys, as if they intuitively knew which toy belonged to whom. Not long after, their mother Florence walked into a room to find Gillian crouched over Jennifer, cradling her sister's head in her hands, playing some kind of role-play game. "The blood's coming out of your eyes," Gillian was saying. "That's where the car hit you." It was a detail Florence obviously hadn't discussed with the girls. When John had identified his daughter's bodies after the accident, Jacqueline's head had been bandaged above the eyes. Then there was the smock. Florence had worn a particular garment whilst helping with the milk round years before the twins were born, and had put it away for good after her daughter's deaths. When the twins were around 4.5, John pulled the old smock out of storage to protect his clothes whilst painting the house. Jennifer looked at him and asked why he was wearing Mummy's coat. When asked how she knew it belonged to her mother, Jennifer said in a matter-of-fact way that Florence had worn it while delivering milk, another detail she couldn't have possibly known. The family had left Hexham when the twins were only 9 months old, moving to a different town entirely. It wasn't until the girls were about 4 that the Pollocks brought them back for a visit. Walking through the streets the twins had no memory of, having been infants the last time they were there, Gillian and Jennifer suddenly announced they wanted to cross the road to reach the park and the swings. They weren't yet close enough to see the park, they simply knew it was there, and knew the way. Later in the visit, walking toward the old parish school, the girls pointed it out, unprompted, as their school, and recalled the location of the playground around the back. A pattern was also emerging in how the twins carried themselves. Gillian, like Joanna before her, was the more sociable and generous of the two, drawn to dress-up and performance, and seemed to mature faster than her twin, despite their being the same age. Jennifer, like Jacqueline, was more dependent, more childlike. Both girls gravitated toward their grandmother for comfort and guidance, just as Joanna and Jacqueline had, even though Florence was now fully present and available in a way she hadn't been while running the family business. Both liked to comb people's hair, especially their fathers, exactly as their late sisters had. And there was the matter of the pencil. Jacqueline had struggled before her death to give up an improper fist grip while learning to write. When the twins began learning themselves, Gillian took to the correct grip immediately, but Jennifer held her pencil in a fist, just as Jacqueline had, and continued doing so until she was 7, occasionally reverting to the grip even into early adulthood. Perhaps scariest of all was the fear. Both twins showed an unusual wariness around cars and roads, gripping their mother's hands tightly when crossing streets. On one occasion, when a car engine suddenly started nearby in a narrow, walled alleyway, John watched both girls freeze in terror and cling to each other, crying out that the car was coming for them. It was, he couldn't help but notice, almost exactly the kind of space, a wall, no room to run, where Joanna and Jacqueline had met their end. By 1963, word of the Pollock family's experiences had reached the local press, and from there, it reached Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, who had built an international reputation studying children who claimed to remember previous lives. Stevenson travelled to meet the family that year, when the twins were 4 years old. He interviewed John and Florence at length, and examined the birthmarks firsthand. He returned in 1967, and again in 1978. He visited once more in 1982, after Florence's death in 1979, and corresponded with John until his death in 1985. Stevenson eventually published a detailed account of the case in his multi-volume work on birthmarks and reincarnation, describing the Pollock twins case as one of the strongest examples in his entire collection. As is often reported in these kinds of cases, the strangeness did not last forever. As the twins grew older, the specific statements and recognitions faded. John, notably, made a point of never discussing their earlier remarks with them, and never told them about his own beliefs regarding reincarnation until they turned 13. By the time Stevenson interviewed the twins again in their 20s, both said they remembered nothing unusual from their childhood. They accepted their parents' account of what had happened, while remaining only mildly convinced of reincarnation as a broader idea. But then there was one final episode, in 1981. Gillian, by then 23 years old, experienced what she described as a spontaneous, vivid inner vision. Herself as a small child, playing in a sandpit, in a garden she could describe in great detail. The description exactly matched a house the family had lived in years before Gillian was born, in a town called Wickham, from a period when her deceased sister Joanna would have been younger than 4. Gillian had never been to Wickham in her life. Ian Stevenson spent roughly 40 years and documented close to 3,000 cases of children who described memories of previous lives. Almost all of them from cultures like India, Sri Lanka, and Lebanon, where reincarnation was already part of the social fabric. Cases from Britain were rare precisely because families there had no framework for taking a child's strange statements seriously, which is part of why the Pollock stood out to him at all, and why the birthmarks, confirmed against the twins who were genetically identical, mattered so much. Stevenson returned to the family on and off for over 20 years, watching the twins grow from toddlers into adults, and in his own writing he singled out the Pollock case as among the strongest he encountered in his entire career, struck by how hard it was to imagine two parents manufacturing and sustaining something so specific across two children for so long. It's the one case out of thousands that he kept coming back to and never quite found a way to close.